So today I'm very happy to introduce Julie Ahern, Senior Director of Operations at Ryder Games. Julie's here to talk about the Revenant Society, the endless loop beneath the city. As of Friday morning, they have crushed their goal by 250%, with over 50,000 pledged so far. With about a week to go, I know your time is precious, so thank you for being here and answering a few questions for us. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I've lost my voice because I've been talking so much at shows and stuff, but I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
Well, that's good. I'll try not to be too hard on you or make you talk too long. So the concept of the game is amazing. So I just have to ask, was there an inspiration for the Revenant Society?
Well, it's interesting. I'm actually new to Van Ryder Games. I came in from Greenbrier Games, and so the project had already started when it fell in my lap, which I was completely excited to do. Um, but one of the things that is, it was coming into the project and stepping into these roles is I know that it's had a very long road. Sen and Banana started this with Van Ryder almost as a conversation of, hey, we'd love to do a project with you, kind of open ended. So there were a lot of ideas generated over the course of about a year before they settled on this particular project, including doing a hostage negotiator RPG. There's a bunch of different ideas. So an already created IP until we got to this point. And of course, it had to fit in the creative space that Sen and Banana bring while also fitting in a Van Ryder style game. And so I think that that was part of the conversation.
Sure, that makes sense. Yep, yep. Okay. Now I understand the Revenant Society uses the Powered by the Apocalypse system. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and why it makes a great system to build a role-playing game around?
Yes, so we are all familiar with D&D. And as somebody who's been playing D&D since the fourth grade, second edition, I am very familiar with that. And that's the one that most people who are not, TTRPG or tabletop role playing game players think of. And so, just briefly, what that is, you're rolling mostly d20s and there's a lot of charts. And so it's a lot of statistics and coming up with what is the numbers and the percentiles and how many dice do you get that generates a lot of combat scenarios, mostly with some narrative and some great narrative especially over the course of the body of work of all of D&D over the years. Powered by the Apocalypse was a system that wanted to do a little bit more of the storytelling and a group storytelling. And so it was created, quite a while ago now, but the concept being that you have moves, and those moves can be general moves that are agreed upon by, the system that meet our common sense kind of things, and then moves that are specific to a character. And moves are either a success, a partial success, or a fail. So there's a lot less while you're still using a D10 typically, or a D6, or, whatever. Well, 2D6 is typically. But when you're rolling, it's going to fall into yeah, you did it. Well, you kind of did it, or no. And that when it's a no, you're gaining experience. And when it's a yes, there might be something working to balance against you, so that the leveling up isn't nearly as extreme as it is in D&D, and also the
Okay.
storytelling becomes part of it. So there's a lot more, how would you like this to play out? And so that the participation isn't just the GM or game master telling you, well, this is what happened, but allows for a lot more of the um, sanctioned cat herding, if you will, by the players.
Sure.
So
Right.
that's a big piece of it. And that, as you level up, your leveling up is based on a lot of times if you weren't successful in a role. So it never feels like a failure is a complete failure. And that the narrative is a big piece of it.
I did play another game that I believe had the same system. It's simpler, right? Or in my terms, crit starter here, we talk about crunchiness. So it's
Yep.
less crunchy, right?
Yes.
Much easier to pick up. Okay, okay. Um, So on to my next question. How much of your project is finished? I mean, where are you at with developing it, production? What point are you going to be at once the Kickstarter finishes next week?
So, Sun and Banana are done. I say that, but every other day I get an email. Hey, I don't know how far you are in the formatting, but can we please add this NPC? So, in effect, we're done. Uh, but there's still some formatting of the book
You're adding
that's going to
sweeteners.
happen. Right. One of the things that we're doing for the scenarios is they're all digital scenarios so that we're not, the guest writers will all be part of a digital release and not in the book so that we're not adding a wait time on that for going to publishing. So, and some tweaks because I've gotten to play test, you know, when we received it there was no formatting, so it was a lot of PowerPoint boxes to check off and things like that, which work very well, but don't look very pretty. And of course, our graphic designer absolutely adores, Scott Beavers adores the Art Deco um, look and visual. So it's finding the balance of
Hmm.
form and function to make sure it looks absolutely like it's in this world that we're in, where it's a of that time period with a thin veneer of decay over everything, um,
Right?
to stay thematic while also still remaining functional, which is a challenge. Not so much the art as the graphic design is probably going to be the biggest bulk of what we have left to do to make sure that everything looks
Okay.
pretty and works. And so we're actually playtesting the graphics, which I don't know if that usually happens, but to have something specific so that you know that it feels right, but it's also playable is important. So that's really all we have
Okay.
left before we're done. And other than that, it's like, as I said, incoming scenarios will all be digital, so those can be added while manufacturing has already started.
Gotcha. Okay. A little bit more specific to the game. How do the watchers affect the game?
So watchers are that balance if you're successful. So if you're very successful, you get two choices of your moves, but also you've attracted a watcher. So if I'm going to try to persuade a, an NPC, a non-playable character, so there's a flower merchant, and I'm going to try to get them to give me some clues about something in the area, location that I'm not familiar with. And I go up to them and I'm persuading so I can get them to do something I want them to do and tell me information that they didn't necessarily want to tell me. I can choose those two things. But also, a watcher is going to be attracted. So a watcher is, and I know you talked about it in your earlier video, is they were a living person who departed this earthly, the mortal coil before their time. They saw one of these gateways that we enter between the living and the dead, got curious, stepped through, and were sucked into the ether. So they are not in limbo, they are not in heaven, they are not in hell, they're not in any other afterlife you could think of. They are in the in between, and they can see and sense things around them, but they cannot interact, and they are trapped there forever, and they are mad about it. They are bitter. They are angry.
Who wouldn't be,
Right.
right?
And their anger is very focused on you because you are getting a second chance and they do not. So they are doing all they can to deter your success, which is mostly um, attracting or making people aware that you are the undead. So there's a certain veneer of magic that people kind of look at you funny, but initially they kind of blink and keep going, like, no, they just must be having a really bad hair day, or oh, they must have just gotten past an illness. But the more watchers around, the more they're like, wait a minute, you're missing part of your cheek. That's not just illness. That's more. So the more watchers you attract, the scarier you become to the living. The harder it is for you to do
Gotcha.
your job of finding
They're
out what
helping to
happened.
remove that veneer.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
shining a spotlight, if you will.
And then shining a spotlight. Right. Right. Um, and then there are 5 scenarios that are included in the Kickstarter.
Correct.
So after finishing those, would your Fate Weaver be able to create new ones so the fun can continue? or
Oh
is that
yes,
something that
there's
you
an
have to
entire
purchase more of?
chapter on how to build your own. We have we do have charts at that point for a Fate Weaver to roll a game, so you could do it on the fly, or if you want to pre-make one, we have lots of different suggestions for that, and also a lot of different resources and links to the resources we used if you want a lot of information about the history of New York City in the 1920s or the Belle Epoque in Paris. So that if you want to add a lot of
Oh,
those
excellent.
touches in, you can do so that are historical. Um, and if you just want it to be your own fun little version, you still have suggestions for different types of NPCs, different kinds of problems you can arise. So yes, we have a how to make it, and also a pretty good. You don't even have to, it doesn't have to be completely from scratch either.
Gotcha, gotcha. So all the printed materials that you have for like the timeline and whatnot, those are all more generic, and you can reuse those for different
Hmm.
scenarios.
Um,
Okay, great.
yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead.
No, no, yes, they are
Okay,
slightly more
well,
generic, but also still specific to the time period and the general neighborhoods. Like in New York, the feel of what a New York neighborhood, even in the 1920s, is still different than what Paris would have had in the Belle Epoque. So we, it's still
gotcha,
tailored slightly.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay, well, thanks for coming on. Before we conclude the interview, is there anything else in the works at Van Ryder Games that you'd want to mention?
Um, I'm not sure what I can mention. Well, yes, all right. So there are other properties that we have that are fairly popular. No Final Girl. Series 2 is coming out,
Mhm.
so the Kickstarter was very successful. Kickstarter back in getting theirs. It's coming to retail very soon. And after that, we're looking at one of our other big um, RPG style board games, which is Detective. So stay tuned for news about that.
Two of Van Ryder Games' most popular titles, if I'm not
You are
mistaken.
correct.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Julie Ahern from Van Ryder Games. Thank you again, Julie. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.